and gaming is in session. People of the Honorable Court, on the docket is the case of Tentacular, developed by Firepunchd and published by Devolver Digital. The charges for Tentacular are as follows: one count of not being just a quest port, one count of brevity and clunk, and one count of variety and public pleasure. The prosecution takes the floor. Thank you, Gaming Court, the esteemed Gaming Court, and your honor, Adam. When one first sees Tentacular amongst the sea of PSVR2 launch titles, one can't help but compare it with our previous defendants, games like Gran Turismo 7, Resident Evil 8, and think, what is this doing here? We're all here in this court today to witness the next generation of PSVR2 and the next generation of VR in general, yet Firepunchd Games has delivered us a game that has been out on PC and out on the Quest for nearly a year now. And while the reception of Tentacular has been warm in the past, many of you question its legitimacy in existing on the PSVR2. I'm here today to tell you that it indeed deserves its position in the PSVR2 library as a PSVR2 launch title, and not just a late blossoming port. So, Tentacular is a game where you exist in this otherworldly body. You're a monster with tentacles, a giant squid, and you're earning your place in society. Vital to your existence as an outsider, you perform tasks for the residents of the island of La Calma to prove yourself as a citizen in this only place you've ever called home. In one scene, you're stacking and balancing shipping containers, and in another, you're assisting a professor with scientific experiments by testing out new magnetic technologies. While doing so, you'll notice a visual clarity in the environment that's consistent and charming, even if not photorealistic or next-gen feeling. While not particularly dazzling, the island of La Calma is bustling with activity. Each environment is interesting, and they're fun to exist in, fun to play with. And, you have things like people to talk to. You have cars to pick up and throw around. You have shipping containers to stack. You have various doodads around that you can interact with. There's even hidden dogs that you got to try to find and pet. It's fun to seek those guys out when you hear them growling. But along with that rock-solid performance comes the precision provided by the PSVR Sense controller. So I don't know if it's the game, if it's the controller, the technology, but that alongside the room-scale environment, you'll be able to walk around these environments to interact with it, or you can use the analog stick if you want to. So comfort is paramount. You can play the game sitting, you can play the game standing, you can kind of do what you want to do, how you want to do it. So what initially seems just like a block stacking mini game collection turns into more of like a physics sandbox game, so where you get new tools and you constantly have new features that you're unlocking and playing with as you're moving around these environments. So you get much more than you'd initially think from just this physics engine. You get rockets to launch, you get slingshots, you're building bridges, you're throwing astronauts into the sky, all sorts of fun stuff happening, and you're doing it all with the little suckers along your tentacle arms. The gameplay is really enhanced by the addition of the haptic triggers, so a game all about picking things up. The haptic triggers allow you to, everything feels slightly different. Everything has a texture to it when you grab it, which makes the gameplay more engaging. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the eye tracking and the spectacular ease with which it is utilized. It's not a graphically impressive game, but I love the fact that when you need to talk to somebody or interact with a menu, eye tracking takes the lead here, and you are naturally talking to people just by looking at them and hitting the O button. And that's an enhancement that the other options, the other systems don't have. So, on the charge of not being just a quest port, I find Tentacular guilty.
So, Alex, I'm curious, and I have a feeling I already know the answer, what PSVR2 technology was implemented that the Quest doesn't have? Which one was implemented the best, or do you think meant most to the gameplay and enjoyment of this game?
This sounds silly. I think the eye tracking, although really the only utilization I felt was looking at a character to talk to them. I glance at a character, the O button pops up in front of them, I hit O, and we start talking. The way to do that without eye tracking is you have to reach out and tap them on top of the head, which is a nice gameplay mechanic, but it would be very frustrating, especially if people are all grouped together and you have a hard time finding the right one, or your tentacles can get pretty big, getting that precision there, and it'd just be kind of tiring to constantly be reaching out and hitting the button to get them to talk. Just looking at them and hitting the button feels so nice, especially when you have more than one character to interact with. It's not the sexiest, but man, it just took all the frustration away that I was initially feeling before I had that turned on, or before they gave that to me in the initial setup of the game.
Yeah, I'm a fan of eye tracking. Glad they used it. Let's move to the next charge.
All right. On the second charge, we have a charge of brevity and clunk. So I must point to the game's overall playtime. I spent around 4 or 5 hours playing through Tentacular, which comprises the majority of the game's mainline story. However, there are side missions for those particularly interested in testing their skill and dexterity, and a playground or a sandbox within which one can create their own tests and environments using the new tools such as balance magnets, rockets, slingshots, all these things that you get unlocked in the main game. You have a place you can go and just try out new things, experiment, build new things, and make whatever you want to make. Um, the side quests I didn't dive into too much. Initially, I kind of got frustrated because there were some missions I didn't really enjoy, and I thought I had to continue doing these things that I didn't really enjoy. But once I realized there weren't side quests, I was like, "Oh, let's just go through the main story," and I had a much better time. Things were more enjoyable, more engaging. Um, yeah, but like things like the sandbox mode and stuff, they're limited by the player's own creativity. So like if you don't want to build something, if you don't want to sit around and think about something fun to do, it's not going to offer too much to you. But I thought, the length of the main campaign, 4 to 5 hours, the variety of each mission, the main campaign missions were different enough that I felt like I got my money's worth. I paid for this game $25. It's kind of a high price tag for this kind of game, but 5 hours is a good amount. I saw a lot, I did a lot, and I didn't feel like I was, robbed of a good experience for the price of what I paid. And, the story, it's a bit heavy handed in some of its moral. I don't know. Morally, it's a bit heavy handed. There's some obvious allusions to real people that are very apparent, and they take a hard stance against those people. Nothing, too controversial, but it's there. And if you're not on board with that, then that could be something that bothers somebody. It didn't really bother me too much, but it was just kind of funny that it kept popping up and it kept being such an important part of the game's story. I thought it was a bit off-putting at times. Um, and then, aside from its length, that might be short for some people. There were times when I would get a bit of clunky stuff happening. You have these tentacles, there's a lot of stuff going on, there's physics interactions going on, and you do have these long arms. Sometimes they would get caught. Sometimes objects would get caught. There'd be a little of that physics jiggle that happens with stuff. There was one time where my tentacle got stuck inside of something and I couldn't pull it out and I couldn't do anything. And I wasn't hitting the button to grab the object. It was just stuck in between two objects and I couldn't yank it out. And that was really frustrating. Or sometimes that would happen and my arms would glitch and just knock something flying across the map. And it's something I needed. And I'd have to wait for it to fall down on a parachute so I could grab it again. So some of those things are kind of frustrating. And it just made, some of these missions a bit more difficult because it just felt kind of clunky overall. The challenge of the game is performing delicate tasks with these tentacles rather than hands. So I understand that I'm not supposed to feel the precision that I would if I was a surgeon with hands or something. But because you have tentacles, you don't have wrists, right? So some things that you're doing, like holding a slingshot, feel kind of funny. You don't know what orientation to get your hand in to grab it so that it feels like you're holding a slingshot and firing something with the other tentacle. A lot of times I'm holding two tentacles up and rotating objects slowly around in my hands just to get the right angle on how I'm holding it. But none of these were game breaking. It's just sometimes I could feel a little bit of frustration building as I was doing something. Luckily, they have a great mechanic where there's a guy almost behind you in every single mission named, I forget his full name, but it's something Rossetti. You can reset the map if you want to really easily, or you can talk to him and he'll give you a hint. He's like, hey, here's what you got to do. And if you ask him again, he's like, I'm going to draw you a picture of what you have to do. And that basically kept me from ever getting to a situation where I was like, I'm just so mad, I don't know what to do next. He would just do things for you. There was even one mission that was pretty delicate. You have to build like a rocket with a lot of components. And he's like, hey, that can be rough. You want me to just build it for you so you can do the next part? And I said no, but I was really glad that was there. So if I did start to get angry, I could just say, yeah, do this for me and let me move on. So all that being said, on the charge of brevity and clunk, I find Tentacular guilty.
So I have three quick questions, Alex. I want these to be quick. First, I've played a lot of games that tend to linger. They last longer than really they should. Do you think Tentacular suffers from this?
Absolutely not. I like the length, but I know a lot of people want more than 4 and 5 hours in a game. But it certainly does not overstay its welcome. When it's done, you're like, yeah, that was a good amount. That's what I wanted to do here.
Is Donald Trump in the game?
He is not, but it's somebody else.
Oh, no, that's a shocker. I'm not going to lie. Yeah. I thought that's what you were talking about.
There might be somebody like him. I don't recall.
Yeah, okay,
I don't
fair
recall
enough.
encountering him.
So we interviewed the developers, Firepunchd Games, on the podcast. And at some point they were telling us that near the end of the game, there was some event where like the head rumble really played a big part. They were just talking about some of the implementation. looking back after finishing the game, do you know what they were talking about? And could you just mention like how head rumble was used or maybe haptic feedback?
Yeah, I mean, so haptic feedback's good for the controllers of picking up stuff, throwing it, things like that. Really, the only time I recall feeling head rumble, and of course it's a subtle effect. There's a lot of games I don't notice it in, but it's
Yeah.
nice to have. It wasn't ever like a, oh, I'm so glad I had head rumble right there. But there are early on in the game, there's like these crystals that if you touch them, it's like toxic, and it's the headset rumbles, the control, it's a whole body like shaking, like don't do that. So I would say the headset rumble is, a really good device there to let you know you shouldn't be doing what you just did. It really sets the doom in for what just happened. But it's nothing like, it's not happening a lot. It's just in those cases. I even threw something in my own head to see if my headset would rumble, and it didn't work. But I think there might have been a case where somebody threw something at me or I got hit with something, and it did work. So it's subtle effect, but I appreciated it when it occurred.
Nice. Let's move to the last charge.
All right. Our final charge, one count of first degree variety and public pleasure. Tentacular never becomes really dull in its gameplay. So it looks like a one note song when you watch the demos. You're picking stuff up and stacking things, but there's enough variety. Things are always changing that you never see like you're doing the same thing twice unless you go into these side missions. So many games will dwell on a mechanic to lengthen the playtime, right? You say, you have this new tool. Let's do 10 levels of that new tool so that we can make this game a longer game. Tentacular is always bringing in a new tool. Anytime you start a mission, somebody says, hey, I have this new thing I want you to try, a new challenge to do. There's a new goal to this mission that you have. So boredom really never creeps in. You spend enough time with these new devices to really make it feel like you're learning it. You get to see how it works initially, test the limits of it, and then do something fun with it. So it's like at most you're going to do the same thing for 3 little missions in a row. That gameplay variety, along with the undeniably enjoyable soundtrack. When the music kicks in, I'm always excited. It's not always running, but when it kicks in, it's always at a great time. And I'm just like, yes, I'm grooving. I'm loving this. I'm feeling this. And then the overall humorous tone. It's a silly game, and they keep that silliness going, even though, again, there's a bit of a heavy-handed joking going on with a particular character. It just, in the end, Tentacular does a great job of putting you in a good mood and keeping you there. So although you get little bits of frustration here and there with that clunk that I mentioned, you're going to walk away having had a good time with Tentacular. And each level comes with a little guy who's ready to give you hints if you get stuck. So I mentioned that. That keeps the frustration low and to a minimum. And I really appreciated having the guy there. I could always talk to him. They're always making little noises in the background, and hearing the little chatter from the characters is always fun to hear. So it just gives you a good time as you're playing it. So for the charge of variety and public pleasure, I find Tentacular guilty.
So my last cross examination lies in the fact there are many games like Job Simulator, like Cosmonious High, that I admit I have not played Tentacular, but they look in similar vein to one another. So what makes Tentacular different from these other games that look similar to it?
I think so. Like Job, I haven't played Cosmonious High. Job Simulator, Vacation Simulator. Yeah, they seem similar because it's mainly you standing in a place, interacting with things around you. Whereas Job Simulator is like, oh, let's play with a copy machine. Let's play with this thing here. It's less about like, oh, a new physics tool that you can play with and building something. And Job Simulator is not that. Tentacular is more about like, oh, here's a fun new object. Let's play with that and see how that integrates with all the stuff that I had before. Here's a new type of magnet. Here's a new spinny thing. Here's a new rocket. How does that interact with what I've been using before? So I mean, they're probably in the same genre of just like, VR games, what you expect a lot of VR games to be like. But I do think there's a difference where Job Simulator is like, do a bunch of small minor stuff. Tentacular is constantly building on itself to add more to the equation.
Final verdict.
Overall, for the case of Tentacular as a game you should buy, the jury finds you. Oh my God, Adam! It's a first for PlayPSVR2, the gaming court. This is a hung jury.
It's a
Adam.
hung jury.
It's a hung jury. Oh man! So here, I do want to give a caveat here. I really enjoyed Tentacular, but I know that it's not a game for everyone. It's short. If you're not looking for a VR type game that you've played before, that's as you mentioned, Job Simulator, Cosmonious High. There's a lot of games out there that do similar kind of things. Maybe that's not as exciting for you. And $25 is a steep price. I'm sure it's going to go on sale at some point. But I have a rough time recommending it to everybody. that being said, I really had a good time with it. Initially, when I was getting stuck in the weeds with side quests and getting frustrated, like I really don't want to do this over and over again, that got a bit, that made me frustrated and bored. But then once I realized, oh, let's go through and progress things that are happening, progress the gameplay, I had a much better time with the game, and I got to see more of the story, which was, nothing huge, but it was just charming and fun to follow along with. Um, yeah, so like I said, I like the game. People like me are probably going to like the game. You have young kids or people that are new to VR, they're going to like the game. But if you've played a lot of VR games, it's probably not going to be something that you're going to be super excited about. That's why it's a hung jury.